Well, now that I'm out of the primary impact zone where Hurricane Ian hit Florida last Tuesday and Wednesday, I'm finally able to begin writing and sharing my daily updates again. Let me begin by saying welcome to Mornings with Bishop Robert. If you've missed me as much as I've missed you, that's a lot. My goal is to introduce people to the Jesus they never knew, and then help them get to know him and his word personally and better. So if our time together today speaks to your heart, let me invite you to like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Ian was the strongest storm to hit Florida in 87 years. The current death toll in Florida sits at 123, but you can count on it going quite a bit higher. So where have I been? What have I been doing, and why? Well, let me begin by telling you that I'm bivocational, meaning I have two very different jobs. In my role as bishop, I write these devotionals and share them, and I lead one of the provinces of our communion, the CEEC.Church. I don't get a salary, never have. It's a labor of love. So that's my first job. I get up early in the morning so I can get in a solid 5.5 hours before I start my other job at 9 a.m. The secular work I do in my other job is as managing director for a group of companies that does venture capital and private equity. That pays the bills. In that role, I lead one of our portfolio companies and often get pulled into various emergencies and projects where my skills are needed. And that's what happened last Tuesday. One of the dozen or so companies in our portfolio, Critical Response Strategies, was part of the disaster response team for Hurricane Ian. We deployed a strike team of about 70 nurses to Fort Myers, essentially sitting on the bullseye and riding out the 150-mile-an-hour winds. It was like a 10-day trip to hell and back. All the nurses got to stay in the safe shelters. My colleague and I were on the second floor of a small hotel. As Ian hit on Tuesday evening, we lost power, water, cell service, and internet for days. In fact, when we checked out of the hotel on Sunday to relocate to a different base of operations, the hotel still had no power. Over 100,000 homes and businesses in that community still don't. And as you look at this video I shot, you can see why. The power poles themselves, concrete pillars, were blown over and snapped power lines. 3 or 4 days into the recovery, we were able to get mobile phone service in many places, but not in others. Well, our job was to keep nurses supplied so they could do their jobs at the shelters. That was a major challenge because of the conditions of the roadways. As you can see, they were littered with storm debris and broken glass and metal and 2x4s and even dumpsters. None of the traffic lights were working. Some of them were just hanging by wires in the middle of the road. We drove where and when we needed to fulfill our mission. Driving in the daytime was incredibly challenging at best. Driving at night, well, that was flat out dangerous. We did both when necessary. I remember sitting in an intersection on the first morning after the storm, dumbstruck as a string of ambulances raced to the short line of Fort Myers. It was something I'd never seen before. I started filming after a dozen or so had already passed, and there were still more than I cared to count. Initially, there were 3 shelters we served in Fort Myers. Then, over the course of a couple days, we consolidated all of them in the core shelter at the Hertz Arena, deployed another team of 20 clinicians to a makeshift hospital that had been set up in an elementary school in Sarasota, and sent 2 more teams down to Naples to help in a couple of hospitals there. All those nurses are still on the job in those locations as I record this. Well, today's verse says, "My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth." And our help does come from the Lord, to be sure. But over the last 10 days, I've watched him work. And he's used nurses handing out kits of items that people need, and deputy sheriffs who are keeping the place safe, and volunteers who survived the storm themselves and then showed up at the shelters to help. He had his people everywhere. They were bringing clothes, blankets, air mattresses, and food. There were librarians, city workers, teachers, and all manner of others who showed up to keep the shelter operating for a week until the Red Cross arrived on the scene. People brought toys and books for kids, denture adhesive and cleanser for seniors, and everything else you can imagine, and probably some stuff you can't. God often works through people, and I never cease to be amazed at the ones he chooses and uses. You know, I'm reminded of the story of a church building that also survived a hurricane, although they had extensive damage to their roof. When the pastor got up that Sunday to address the congregation, he said, "Folks, I've got good news this morning, and I've got bad news. The good news is that we've got all the money we need to fix the roof of the church and make it as good as new. The bad news is that it's still in your pockets." Well, many folks have asked me how they can help. So this morning, there are people in shelters who've lost their prescription medication in the storm. Now, lots of pharmacies are coming to the shelters to gather the information needed to replace those prescriptions, and insurance is covering most of the bills. But a lot of these people don't have the money they need to cover the deductibles on their meds. The day I left the Hertz Arena, we were trying to come up with close to $1,000 to pay prescription deductibles. Now, there are other needs, of course, but this is one that you can help with if you'd like. The good news is that among the 58,000 people who watched one of the Mornings with Bishop Robert messages last week, or clicked like on one of my posts with a picture and a message, we've got plenty of money to cover lots of needs. You know the bad news. But here's my promise to you. If you'll trust me with a financial gift for hurricane relief, I'll make sure it's put to good use on the ground in the hardest hit communities of southwestern Florida. You know, I ask you every day to share my messages with your friends and family and be part of the team showing the love of Jesus. Today, I'm asking you to share the message and also give what you can, and together we'll put it to work. Click on that link you see on the screen. Go to ceec.church and give a generous gift if you can. We're not deducting any fees or segments or whatever. Whatever comes into our bank accounts, that's what we're sending down to Southwest Florida. And we've got people on the ground who can put it to work. My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And he uses people like you. Together, we can make a real difference. Well, tomorrow, God willing, I'll be back with a devotional that's more in line with the ones you're used to. But today, I'm asking you to join me and be the hands and feet of Christ on the ground in the areas ravaged by Hurricane Ian. Thank you for helping.